I know how deeply you, the entire nation, and I think I may say the whole world, sympathize with me in the irreparable loss we've all suffered.
The room had been prepared for a routine family briefing. Instead, King Charles entered carrying a sealed succession document, dismissed every junior aide, and delivered a declaration no one had expected to hear. Princess Anne would become the monarchy's emergency authority, empowered to protect the crown if illness, division, or constitutional instability threatened the royal future. Then Charles gave her a name that instantly changed the atmosphere, the Iron Lady of the Royals. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles knew everyone in that chamber understood the danger behind those words. Anne sat opposite him, William and Catherine remained close, while Camilla watched the sealed papers without blinking. The succession document, a formal order explaining who may act when the sovereign or direct heir cannot carry more than ceremonial weight. It gave the Princess royal power to steady the institution if illness, division, or confusion threatened the line to the throne. The king placed a black fountain pen beside the final page, yet he did not sign. Silence tightened around the table. He looked at his sister and said, "You have never asked for power. That is why I can trust you with it." Anne did not smile. She kept both hands folded, but William noticed her thumb pressing against her wedding ring, a sign that the woman known for discipline felt the burden descending. Camilla broke the silence. She asked whether the new position was ceremonial, perhaps another title created to reassure officials. Charles answered with one word, "No." The Queen's expression changed, because the emergency guardian of succession, a protector empowered to prevent disruption around the crown, could coordinate directly with William and stop unauthorized decisions before palace factions turned them into reality. Anne understood the hidden warning. Her brother had not called her the Iron Lady merely to praise her strength. He was telling everyone that he believed danger was already moving through the family. William heard it too. Catherine felt his hand tense beside hers, while Camilla looked toward the closed door as though someone outside it had become a threat. Charles signed at last. The scratch of the pen sounded final. Advisors gathered their papers, guards reopened the doors, and the meeting began to dissolve. Yet William stayed behind. Beneath the signed order, he saw a second sealed file marked with his own name. Anne had received the authority, but the fear behind Charles's decision was still hidden, and William was about to discover that the king had not acted because of one crisis, but because of several. Behind every royal title stood a person who could lose something irreplaceable. Charles was fighting against time. William was protecting a future he had not yet inherited. Catherine was trying to hold her family steady while the institution tightened around them. Camilla feared being pushed outside the circle of power. And Anne, who had spent a lifetime refusing drama, suddenly found herself carrying the authority to decide which voices the monarchy would trust. Anne had never built her reputation through speeches, charm, or carefully staged emotion. She had earned it through decades of duty, discipline, and an almost stubborn refusal to make royal service about herself. When others hesitated, she continued. When personalities clashed, she remained steady. Charles had watched stronger voices fracture under pressure, but his sister had never confused attention with loyalty. That was why the emergency appointment mattered. It was not simply another honor. It was protection placed between the heir and anyone trying to control a fragile transition. William understood that truth more clearly than anyone. He was the future king, yet the succession, the formal transfer of the crown from one sovereign to the next, remained vulnerable before it was complete. Anne now stood as his shield, but that protection carried its own discomfort. He did not want to look weak. He did not want the family to believe he needed someone else to guard his future. Catherine found the princess alone after the meeting, standing in silence near a Windsor window. She approached carefully and asked the question no one else dared to ask. Was she frightened? Anne did not turn immediately. Then she answered, "Only of failing when the family finally needs honesty." Catherine heard no pride in her voice. Only weight. Charles felt that weight too. He had placed a brutal responsibility on the sister, who had already surrendered more freedom than almost anyone around him. He knew Anne would carry it without complaint, and that knowledge made his guilt even sharper. Camilla experienced the decision differently. After the others left, she sat beside the king and noticed the emergency document had already been locked away. She had not been allowed to read the full order. The message was impossible to ignore. Charles trusted her as his wife, but he had trusted Anne with the machinery of survival. William later admitted to Catherine that competing palace factions had been giving his father contradictory advice. Some were already trying to influence appointments that would shape the next reign. When he confronted Anne, she promised to defend the line of succession, but not his comfort. She would protect the crown, she told him, even if that meant forcing him to hear truths he did not want. Then Anne remembered the rehearsal. One altered document, one moved chair, one moment when someone had tried to reshape the future without the heir's approval. The title Iron Lady had been forged through decades of service, but it was one specific betrayal, hidden behind a ceremonial rehearsal, that finally forced Charles to place the crown in Anne's hands. The emergency had not begun with illness, scandal, or a public announcement. It began during a private succession rehearsal at Buckingham Palace, where every movement had been planned and every name carefully positioned. William arrived expecting to review procedures that would one day guide the monarchy through its most delicate transition. Instead, he discovered that a revised document had quietly transferred key emergency powers away from the heir and placed them in the hands of advisors he had never authorized. Charles had approved the rehearsal to test how the household would function if he suddenly became unable to carry out his duties. The succession protocol, the agreed plan for protecting royal authority during a change of reign, was supposed to keep William at the center of every major decision. Anne would advise him. Senior officials would support him. No one was meant to act above him. Anne noticed the first warning before anyone spoke. William's chair had been moved away from the central table. At first, the change looked small, almost meaningless. Then she opened the newly printed protocol and found the real danger. An unnamed royal executive circle had been given authority to act before consulting the heir. Her anger did not explode. It hardened. Anne lifted the document, crossed the room, and placed it directly in front of Charles. She pressed one finger against the altered paragraph and said, "This was not here yesterday." The king read the sentence once, then again. Around him, officials lowered their eyes. William felt the humiliation immediately. Someone had tested a weaker version of his future authority while he was sitting in the room. His place in the succession was being treated as though it could be adjusted by committee. Rather than allow his anger to become spectacle, the prince pushed back his chair and left the table without a word. Camilla defended the amendment. She insisted it had been designed to protect Charles and prevent confusion during an emergency. Anne turned toward her and asked the question that cut through every excuse. Why does protecting him require silencing the heir? The queen had no easy answer. Charles ordered the doors closed and told the guards that no one would leave until the document's origin had been identified. Yet the revision had passed through several offices, and every official claimed someone else had approved it. No single person accepted responsibility. That frightened the king more than a confession would have. Anne then revealed that she had kept the earlier marked copy. Her decision gave Charles proof that palace procedure itself could be manipulated without an open act of rebellion. Later, he asked his sister what she would do if another unauthorized order appeared. Anne answered without hesitation, "I would stop it before anyone had time to obey." That answer stayed with Charles, and when he finally gave Anne emergency authority, one person demanded to know whether the appointment was protection or a direct accusation. The confrontation came before the palace could prepare a public explanation. Camilla entered Anne's private sitting room without an aide, closed the door, and asked the question everyone else was too cautious to speak aloud. Had Charles appointed his sister to protect the monarchy or to restrain his wife? Anne did not soften her expression. She invited the queen to sit, pushed the emergency order across the table, and told her to read every line. Camilla already understood that the balance inside the family had shifted. She still stood beside the king, but Anne now held emergency powers the queen did not possess. The order allowed the princess to stop any unauthorized decision involving the succession, the process that determines how the crown passes to the next sovereign. That authority was not symbolic. It could silence advisors, freeze instructions, and place William beyond the reach of palace factions. Anne knew resentment left in darkness would grow into something far more dangerous. She had agreed to the meeting because the monarchy could not survive another hidden battle. Camilla read the clause twice, set the document down, and asked, "Do you believe I would act against William?" The answer came without softness. "I believe fear can make any of us act against our better judgment." Camilla heard condemnation. Her face tightened as she accused Anne of treating her like a permanent outsider, no matter how many years she had stood beside Charles, or how many private storms she had endured with him. She had served the monarch, defended him, and absorbed public hostility. Yet one emergency had been enough to place another woman between her and the future. Anne refused to retreat. She said she did not question Camilla's devotion to the king. She questioned whether devotion to one person always protected the institution. Love could steady a sovereign, but it could also make people justify decisions they would never accept in calmer times. Camilla then revealed what she had told Charles in a recorded private conversation, days before the rehearsal. Rival advisors were trying to create competing centers of power, each claiming to protect a different part of the family. She insisted she had not changed the document and had never approved reducing William's authority. Anne answered with a truth even more disturbing. The investigation had found no mastermind. Several officials had made small changes, each believing they were serving someone important. Together, those choices had created a threat no single person had intended. Camilla rose to leave, but Anne moved the emergency order out of her path. She promised never to use it to humiliate her. The queen paused. For the first time, she understood that the princess was offering boundaries, not war. Then a message arrived from William. Another directive had been issued under Charles's name, and the king denied approving it. The private argument ended without reconciliation, because the palace had produced a second unauthorized command, and this time Anne would have to prove whether her new power was real. Power inside a palace rarely announces itself with raised voices. It appears in schedules, signatures, locked files, and instructions obeyed before anyone asks who issued them. The second directive looked ordinary. Several members of William's transition team were to be removed from an upcoming constitutional briefing. Yet Charles denied signing it. Anne now faced her first test. She could hesitate and preserve appearances, or use her new authority and expose how deeply the confusion had spread. Anne understood exactly what the order allowed her to do. The emergency authorization gave her temporary power to freeze any instruction connected to succession planning until its source had been confirmed. That mattered because William's transition team, the advisors and trusted officials preparing to support him during a future change of reign, formed the structure around the heir. Remove them, and he would be left surrounded by unfamiliar voices at the most vulnerable moment of his life. Charles read the disputed directive twice. His face tightened. Then he removed his glasses and admitted something that frightened Anne more than anger ever could. He no longer knew which instructions carrying his name could be trusted. The king had spent years trying to keep rival loyalties from becoming open conflict, but every compromise had created another shadow. Now those shadows were speaking with his authority. Anne moved immediately. She entered the administrative office, placed the false order on the central desk, and instructed every official to stop processing it. One senior courtier objected, warning that halting a royal directive could create chaos. The princess pointed to Charles's signed emergency authorization and answered that obeying an unverified command would create something worse. William did not welcome the protection. He told his aunt that he was tired of being treated as though he could not defend his own future. Anne refused to flatter him. She said accepting legitimate support was not weakness, especially when the attack had been designed to remain invisible. Strength, she reminded him, meant recognizing danger before pride made it useful to someone else. Charles heard those words in silence. He knew Anne was also speaking to him. His effort to satisfy competing family interests had weakened the boundaries around power, and others were now exploiting that uncertainty without needing to break a single law. The investigation uncovered the hidden channel. An old authorization system allowed senior staff to reuse language from previously approved documents without obtaining a fresh signature from the monarch. No signature had been forged. His authority had simply been copied. Anne ordered the system suspended at once. The decision cut off the quiet route through which royal commands could be imitated, but it also removed several officials from sensitive duties. Anne had closed the hidden channel, but the sound of that door shutting echoed through every royal office, and Camilla soon learned that someone she trusted had been caught on the wrong side of it. By sunset, the emergency appointment was no longer symbolic. Offices had been locked, access cards suspended, and advisors removed from the succession briefings they had attended for years. No public statement explained the sudden changes. Inside the palace, however, everyone understood that Anne had acted. The most painful consequence reached Camilla when her longtime private secretary was informed that she could no longer enter meetings involving the transition to William's reign. Anne's review drew a hard line between ordinary royal duties and succession-related work. Staff members could keep their positions, continue serving the household, and remain close to the family, but access to the crown's most sensitive planning was now restricted. The chain of command, the clear order showing who holds authority and who answers to whom, had to be rebuilt. Charles remained sovereign. William remained heir. Anne stood between them and anyone attempting to interfere. Camilla watched the consequences arrive in silence. Her private secretary approached the corridor checkpoint, removed the security pass worn for years, and placed it in a silver tray. The aide thanked her quietly, then walked away without looking back. That small gesture wounded the queen more deeply than any public accusation could have done. She felt exposed. People would see the removal and assume her household had caused the crisis, even though Anne had found no deliberate plot. When Camilla confronted Charles, she asked whether he still trusted her. The king wanted to comfort his wife, but he refused to reverse the restriction. Trust, he told her, could not replace safeguards. The answer was calm. Its effect was devastating. William later found his father sitting alone in the study, with two photographs nearby. One showed the coronation. The other showed Charles and his siblings as children, long before titles turned affection into duty. The monarch admitted that preserving the crown had begun to feel like choosing whom to wound. Every action saved the institution, while damaging someone inside it. Anne then uncovered the final link. Camilla's secretary had unknowingly forwarded an obsolete protocol draft, allowing altered language to circulate through official channels. The aide had not betrayed anyone. Carelessness had done what conspiracy might have failed to achieve. That discovery proved Anne's darkest warning. A succession crisis did not require a villain. Divided loyalties, unchecked assumptions, and one unverified document could create disaster on their own. William could no longer ignore the human cost. If every safeguard created another casualty, then protection itself might begin to destroy the family it was meant to save. The machinery of the crown had been stabilized, but the family inside it was bleeding, and William now needed to know whether Anne intended to rule the emergency or finally bring it to an end. There were no advisors in the room, no documents on the table, and no guards close enough to hear. William met Anne in a small sitting room at Windsor and asked her to make the most difficult choice of the crisis. She could continue using emergency authority until every risk had been eliminated, or she could trust him to assume greater responsibility now. The prince was no longer asking to be protected. He was asking to be tested. William accepted that his aunt had prevented unauthorized decisions from reshaping the succession. Without her intervention, unfamiliar advisors might already have been controlling the future in his name. Yet the protection carried a growing danger. If Anne remained the strongest voice for too long, the future king could begin to look like a man waiting behind her, rather than a leader preparing to step forward. Anne understood the risk, but the accusation still wounded her. The emergency order, the temporary authority created to stabilize royal power during a crisis, had never been designed to replace the heir. Its purpose was to protect William, while Charles restored a reliable chain of command. Every action she had taken had brought resentment toward her, while strengthening his position. William poured tea for both of them, but neither touched it. He chose his words carefully. You cannot guard the succession forever without eventually standing in front of it. Anne's expression tightened. She reminded him that she had frozen false directives, challenged senior officials, and accepted anger from Camilla's household to defend his future. She had not asked for praise, but she would not accept the suggestion that she was clinging to power. William apologized, though he refused to withdraw the challenge. The monarchy, he said, had to see him making difficult decisions, not simply benefiting from his aunt's courage. Protection could save an heir, but only responsibility could prepare a sovereign. Then Anne revealed the truth. She had been waiting for him to confront her. If William had accepted her authority without demanding a greater role, she would have questioned whether he was ready. His resistance was not disrespect. It was proof that the man beneath the title understood what leadership required. Anne presented her final plan. William would lead a new succession council, a small body responsible for coordinating the transfer of royal authority, while she retained only a narrow emergency veto. That safeguard would disappear once Charles formally approved the reforms. Anne slid the untouched teacup toward him. Then sit at the head of the table. William finally drank. No ceremony marked the change, yet both understood that authority had just passed through trust rather than force. Charles approved the arrangement, but the palace still had to explain why Anne had received such extraordinary power without exposing the family's deepest divisions. The private struggle had produced a solution, but the monarchy now faced the judgment of the public, and one photograph outside Buckingham Palace would define how the entire crisis was remembered. The announcement reached the public at precisely 9 in the morning. Buckingham Palace confirmed that Princess Anne had been appointed to safeguard royal continuity during a restructuring of succession procedures. The statement avoided the details, but one phrase dominated every broadcast: Iron Lady of the Royals. Within minutes, the title moved from palace language into national conversation, transforming a private act of family survival into a public judgment on strength, loyalty, and the future of the crown. Charles had approved language designed to reassure the country without exposing the conflict inside his household. Anne's emergency role, the statement explained, had protected constitutional continuity, the uninterrupted transfer of royal authority during a crisis, while a clearer structure was built around the king and his heir. William was named chair of the Permanent Succession Council, proving that his aunt had strengthened his position rather than taken it from him. The media reaction was immediate. A national broadcaster opened its midday bulletin with a split image of Anne in military uniform beside the signed order. The headline was blunt: "The princess who stepped forward when the crown could not risk confusion." Praise followed, but so did suspicion. If such power had been necessary, what danger had the palace feared? Outside Buckingham Palace, reporters held up their screens as the announcement spread through the gathering crowd. When Anne's motorcade passed, an elderly veteran removed his hat and raised it toward the car. Applause began around him, uncertain at first, then strong enough to follow the vehicle along the gates. Anne heard it from inside, but did not wave immediately. The princess looked down, uncomfortable that a painful family crisis had turned her into a national symbol. The title sounded like victory to the public. To her, it carried the memory of locked offices, wounded loyalties, and a brother forced to admit that his own authority had been copied. Critics pressed harder. They questioned why emergency safeguards had been needed at all, and whether the monarchy had come closer to internal collapse than the statement admitted. The words "Iron Lady" became both celebration and evidence proof of strength, but also proof that something had gone dangerously wrong. Then Camilla ended one strain of speculation. She joined Charles, William, Catherine, and Anne for the first public appearance after the announcement. Before they stepped forward together, the Queen adjusted the clasp on Anne's coat and quietly said, "They are waiting for you." Anne answered, "They are waiting for all of us." The united appearance calmed the country, but the final judgment had not yet been made. The public had embraced the Iron Lady, yet only Charles could decide whether his sister would remain an emergency guardian or whether her greatest act of service was knowing when to surrender the power she never wanted. The final meeting took place in the same Windsor chamber where the crisis had begun. This time, there were no sealed files waiting beneath the king's hand, and no disputed orders circulating through hidden offices. Charles sat with Anne, William, Catherine, and Camilla as the restored succession structure was read aloud. The emergency had passed. The monarchy had survived its internal confusion. Now the king had to decide what the words "Iron Lady of the Royals" would mean after the power itself was gone. Charles listened as the permanent structure confirmed him as sovereign and placed William at the head of succession planning. The new council, a defined group responsible for preparing the lawful transfer of royal authority, would operate through one clear chain of command. No advisor could borrow old language, create competing instructions, or hide behind uncertainty again. Anne would remain a senior voice, but her power to freeze decisions alone was ending. The king signed the termination order, turned the fountain pen between his fingers, and offered it to his sister. She looked at it for a moment, then gently refused. The authority belonged to the emergency, not to me. Her answer carried no disappointment, only relief. Charles apologized for asking her to carry a burden that had cost her peace, trust, and affection inside the family. Anne told him protecting her brother had never been the hardest part. The real struggle had been forcing everyone to face what fear had done to them. Fear had made loyalty possessive, caution secretive, and love dangerously easy to misuse. Camilla finally spoke. She acknowledged that the restrictions had prevented confusion from becoming a constitutional disaster. a crisis capable of weakening the lawful transfer of the crown. The queen offered no warm embrace, but she gave Anne something equally meaningful: respect. The princess accepted it without triumph, because victory had never been her goal. William thanked his aunt for defending his future while refusing to flatter him. He promised that the council would never again allow devotion to one person to weaken duty to the monarchy. Catherine watched Anne finally lean back after weeks of tension, then reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Charles gave his final decision. Iron Lady of the Royals would remain an honorary description of Anne's service, never an active office or rival source of power. Anne closed the emergency file and handed it to the royal archivist. The door opened, and this time no one walked out wounded or afraid. The family left together. King Charles may have named Anne the Iron Lady of the Royals, but her final act revealed the deeper truth. She did not save the monarchy by standing above her family. She saved it by holding them together until they were strong enough to stand beside one another again. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.